from the Majjhima Nikaya, right? I'll get right down to it, okay? It's clear, is it? All right. This is Sutta number 75 of the Majjhima Nikaya, and it is one of the strongest and one of the most difficult, you could say, suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. So this is talking about gratification of our senses. And as humans, we have been endowed with all these senses, and we go on enjoying. That's what do you think? I mean, it's normal, right? All of us have been doing that right along. But so this sutta actually takes the parable of a blind man and a leper, right? But you will have to keep your focus very well, because the same blind man and the leper are taken in a couple of different aspects. So I'll elaborate on that. Okay. So this sutta takes place when the Buddha was living in Kuru country and in the town of Kammassa Dhamma. So that is, I think, corresponding to Uttar Pradesh in contemporary India. And this sutta unfolds in this town called Kammassa Dhamma, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, presently Delhi, or developed into Delhi. So it was in this town that Buddha gave some of the most important discourses, including the Satipatthana Sutta and the Mahanidana Sutta, and some other very deep discourses. So at the time this discourse takes place, Buddha was not accompanied by the Sangha, but living alone in the fire chamber of a Brahmin that belonged to the Bharadvaja clan. So I will call him Bharadvaja in future, but he belonged to that clan. And that's one of the most important Brahmin clans in India. And he must have asked permission to stay in this fire chamber for a while. And we'll come to understand why later on. So perhaps this chamber was where the Brahmin conducted this all-important fire ceremony that is prescribed for them in the Vedas. So it was not a normal room, but that ordinary people stayed, but a room for those living in their, Aztec or religious life. And the Buddha, as he so often does, was just sleeping on a mat made out of grass. So one day, the Buddha rises and he takes his alms bowl and he goes into the town of the hamlet of Kammassa Dhamma on his alms round. And returning from that, he takes his meal. Once the meal is over, he retires to a forest grove where he spends the day in meditation. Now, while the Buddha was away from this Brahmin's fire chamber where he resided temporarily, a wanderer by the name of Magandiya arrived at this fire hut. And now when you hear Magandiya, the main name would come to you as the woman who tried to entice Buddha. But this is actually in the Majjhima Nikaya, there are two suttas with this name Magandiya, but it does not mention the lady here. Now his name was Magandiya and he's a wanderer. So one Magandiya named in the suttas is his uncle, also Magandiya, and this is the nephew. Now the uncle had, although he was an Aztec or a wanderer, he had become, he had met Buddha and he had attained Arahanthood actually. So when this nephew, also Magandiya, heard this, he was very concerned. He was actually really annoyed with the Buddha for converting his uncle into a monk and ordaining him. So now this nephew is described as a wanderer, I said. And in Pali, it's known as Paribhajaka, which means he lives the life of a wandering Aztec monk without a permanent or fixed residence. But as you will see, despite being an Aztec, he's a advocate of hedonism. That means the indulgement of the senses. He's an advocate of that. So rather than having restraint, when we say wanderer, we would say they're all restrained and they don't, entertain any of those senses. But he's actually the opposite. He is an advocate of all the sense pleasures that you can be gratified with. So this is the view in this Brahmajala Sutta in the Digha Nikaya. It says in this, when a person is fully supplied with the pleasures of the senses and can freely indulge in them, they say that is the supreme Nibbana. So it's a false view that Buddha spoke of in the Brahmajala Sutta. So he might have belonged to this community. And actually in another sutta, Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 45, Chula Dhamma Samadhana Sutta, the shorter discourse on the ways of undertaking things, page number 405, the Buddha speaks of certain recluses and Brahmins who hold the view that there's no harm in indulging in sensual pleasures. And they take down the sensual pleasures and they divert themselves with women wanderers who wear their hair bound in a top knot. That's how it says. So it seems that Magandiya was from this tradition. And when the wanderer Magandiya arrives there, he sees this bed of grass laid, and it seems like it's for a wanderer or an ascetic. So he asks Bharadvaja, to whom does this belong? It seems like it belongs to a wandering ascetic. So in this Pali canon, it says how Bharadvaja answered, there is an ascetic Gautama, the son of the Sakyas. I'll read it out here. He has gone forth from the Sakya clan, and a good report has spread about him. His fame is perfect. He's enlightened, endowed with knowledge and conduct, and so on and so forth. He went on to say the virtues of Buddha. When Magandiya heard this, how do you think he felt? He was inflamed, absolutely inflamed, because he realized that this Gautama is the very same person who ordained his uncle and brought all this calamity. He thinks it's a calamity to be an arahant. And so he says, it's an ill sight. And it's a terrible thing to see this bed of this recluse Gautama. And then he uses a rather puzzling word. It's called, it's a derogatory word, okay? A rare, obscure Pali term, bu-na-hu. Apparently, it's not a common expression. And the commentary explicates this meaning as a destroyer of growth, something like a repressionist. Also, it also says it can be an abortionist or an embryo killer. So several similes are given. So remember, we said he held the view that growth should be in the six senses, experimenting whatever sense objects that comes before him, like with more intensity, more variety, more experience. So that he thought was the ultimate good. And it should be pursued without shame and without restrictions. So Magandiya now describes Buddha as a repressionist, a bu-na-hu. Now, so Bharadvaja, he condemned, just by looking at the bed of grass, he condemned Buddha. And he said, he's a destroyer of humanity. All right. So it seems a bad designation because Magandiya immediately says, good Bharadvaja, please do not say that. Because be careful what you say, because good Gautama has many wise and learned Brahmins and warriors, householders, recluses, and who have placed their confidence in him and have been guided by him. So Magandiya, you know how people are. He doesn't want to change his opinion. He says he's a bu-na-hu. And then Bharadvaja says, okay, if I meet Buddha, may I say it as it is? He says, no problem. Say it the way you want. If I meet him, I will also say that he is a repressionist, a Bunahu. So meanwhile, while this conversation is taking place, the Buddha is presumably still in his meditative state. Somehow, when this conversation takes place, he becomes aware of it, through his special faculty of knowledge. And then this divine ear, he is able to listen. So the divine ear, is a special faculty of hearing, which develops as a result of the achievement of very high states of samadhi. So, and also this person is, that enables the person to hear sounds even in other realms. Now, according to the commentary, the reason why Buddha attended to this conversation, specifically this one, is that the Buddha came on this journey specifically because he knew that this wanderer Magandiya had the potential to achieve arahanthood. With his immense compassion, when he looks at the world every morning, he looks at all the sentient beings and he sees who is capable and who just needs a little push, a little nudge to be on that. So he saw that Magandiya, even though he's very hostile and angry, had sown seeds, wholesome seeds, and meritorious seeds, and that all this potential was waiting to come to fruition. So this is Buddha, and when Buddha had made this trip, leaving his comfortable Jetavana monastery, especially for this Magandiya. What great compassion. So anyway, he was listening to this conversation now happening between Magandiya and Bharadwaja because he wanted to have some guidelines on how to instruct Magandiya. And in the evening, now this is happening somewhere else. In the evening, Buddha gets up from his meditation and he goes to the fire hut. I'm eliminating a lot of details, hopefully. It won't distort the sutta. And he meets Bharadwaja, the Brahmin, whose hut he's staying. And they greet each other. And then before Bharadwaja wanted to say this. Okay, somebody actually said something like this. But Buddha says, Bharadwaja, did you happen to have a conversation with Magandiya about this bed of grass? And now it says, so Buddha is opening up the conversation. And then the Brahmin is like wonderstruck. And it says Samvega, his hair stood up on end and he says, I actually wanted to tell you this, but you have told this before. So now comes Magandiya, arrogant. I think he's waiting for a bit of a verbal attack on Buddha. Okay. So anyway, they exchanged pleasantries and he sits down to speak to Buddha. And then Buddha is going to make a statement to explicate this meaning of Magandiya, his accusation that Buddha is a Bunahu. So he speaks, Magandiya, the eye delights in forms. This is directly from the sutta. I have the book here, but Magandiya, the eye delights in forms, takes delight in forms, rejoices in forms. That has been contained by the Tathagata, guarded, protected, and restrained. And he teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of restraint. Was it with reference to this that you said, I am a destroyer of growth? So now Buddha has he's only talking about form here, but in the sutta, it spells out all the faculties. So he says the eye delights in forms, the ear delights in sounds, nose in smells, tongue in flavors, and the body in tangibles, and the mind in mental objects. And the Tathagata, guarded and protected and restrained, he teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of restraint? Was it with reference to this, that you called me the destroyer of growth? And Magandiya says, that is precisely what I said, because that is what is preserved in our texts. So now we don't know how these texts came into, because they were all from oral tradition, but this is what Magandiya says. So from this statement, and the same thing is repeated with regard to the other 5 senses, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, moving through the sense faculties, and it takes the likes of these respective objects. And then the ordinary, uncontrolled, undeveloped mind is repeatedly going out, seeking these pleasurable, delightful objects. And when it finds this pleasant or agreeable, it takes delight in that, and it rejoices in that. And then, so we try to experience these more and more with more and more intensity. Hold on to them, cling to them, right? So according to the commentary, we mentioned earlier, so Magandiya is an advocate of hedonism. So his belief is, again, like I said, that the 6 senses should be indulged to the maximum. So in taking this position, Magandiya and the Buddha are clashing on a very fundamental point. The Buddha teaches, as part of his training and discipline, especially for those seeking the highest goal, that the 5 senses, the 5 physical senses should, and the mind faculty should be restrained or trained. It's not this, we know that it's not this kind of repression or puritanical repression that you nurture it, but it's somewhere lying dormant. But it is this process of gradually training and containing oneself to give up this lower pleasure and this entangling and binding pleasure in order to find a higher pleasure, liberating, a more liberating pleasure. And even though this ultimate goal is the supreme state of bliss, one has to begin by denying oneself the liberty to indulge freely in this enjoyment of the senses. Then by controlling one's senses, he perfects this, he protects his mind. And by lust, greed, craving, all of that. And all of this enjoyment that you thirst for. And then we know that by controlling these senses, one is able to get a firm grip on the process of the mind. And then he can train his mind to focus more and more on these indestructible objects and composing his mind, collecting his mind, that will eventually bring deep absorption states. So the insight knowledge will come only at that point. So now the Buddha is not going to submit to Magandiya just like that. Okay, but he's going to guide Magandiya step by step on how he can recognize how unsatisfactory this indulgence in the 5 senses are. So it says here, Magandiya, the eye delights in forms, takes delight in forms, rejoices in forms. That has been trained by the Tathagata, guarded, protected, and restrained. Was it with reference to that you call the recluse Gautama the destroyer of growth? So we went through that. And then here, now he says, now he's going to really hit the nail, but very subtly. So he says, someone may have formerly enjoyed himself with forms cognizable by the eye, wished for, desired, agreeable, likable. I'm only going to take the eye faculty. But on a later date, having understood what they actually are, the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, and the danger and the escape, in the case of forms, he might abandon craving from forms, remove this fever for forms, abide without thirst, and his mind inwardly at peace. And now he asks, what do you say, Magandiya? So the Buddha is taking the case of someone who has apparently from a well-to-do family, he has an affluent family, so he's able to indulge in all the senses, but someone who later understands the danger or this understands this process completely, and he gives them up. So the first two here, what he said, it's the origin and the cessation. He had it and then he gave it up. So that is all, that all the sensory objects arise and pass away. So origination, they have origination, arise for a moment, and then they vanish. And even though they seem to be, they seem to last for some time, they are originating through conditions. And when those conditions cease, that also ceases. So everything is experienced by these senses. They are perishing from moment to moment, right? And so by mentioning origin and disappearance, which particular characteristic of phenomena are we talking here? Yes, impermanence and anicca. And by referring to impermanence, we can draw out the other two major characteristics, that they are all conditioned phenomena, unsatisfactory and insubstantial and without a self. Now, so this is called, now when all these sensory objects are pleasurable and agreeable and they give a certain satisfaction, this is called pasada, which means it has a sweet taste. And so the mind gets, one gets enjoyment out of the beautiful forms, lovely harmonious music or sounds, smells. So there's always a condition. And when that condition arises and fades, that's it. So the drawback or the pitfall is that they are impermanent, they don't last. And then we think we achieve satisfaction, and then we want more, but they rise and fade away. So this is what Buddha wants Magandiya to see. Right. So, so now to explain this a little further, the person who is spoken of in the sutta now, we are going back to the sutta, he had everything, but at a later date, he decided to give everything. And so he first seeks the escape from them by putting away this desire and craving. And then when he abandons this craving for form, he is able to dwell with a mind inwardly at peace. And if you pay close attention here, Buddha uses 3 words to refer to this craving. Craving as in self, that is tanha, but he also chooses another word, which is translated as fever, parilaha, which is the quality of burning. Because when a person doesn't get the forms or the sights or the sounds that he wants, it causes a burning. So we can actually put it into our lives and see how, things that we needed and we didn't get, or we wanted more, we can check on that. And so when they get what they want, it's like the fire consuming, enjoying, go on enjoying, but then that is also all temporary. It comes to an end. And he also speaks about burning up. And burning up because of the sounds, burning up because of the smells, because of the touches, because of the ideas, some radical things perhaps. And it makes one thirsty. It's not only the fever, it also makes one thirsty for more. He has this intense longing. And when this person abandons this craving At the same time, there is a cooling down for this fever, the quenching of the thirst. And so this person dwells with a mind inwardly at peace. So Buddha asks Magandiya again, what do you say to him? In other words, would you encourage him, knowing that there's a quenching of the thirst? Would you encourage him to go, go party, go to restaurants, go to concerts, continue? And Magandiya is left speechless. Magandiya has nothing to say. So then he repeats this again. And he says, this hypothetical person that he was referring to, he said it was him, that he himself is an example of this. He says that when he was a Sakyan prince with all the five sensory he had gratification of all the five sensory objects. He had 3 houses, 3 palaces built for the 3 seasons. And it says here, during the rainy seasons, I lived in the rain's palace, enjoying myself with musicians. None of them were men. So in other words, they were all women. And I stayed upstairs, and the female servants would bring everything that I needed. So obviously the height of enjoyment. But he says, on a later date, on a later occasion, having understood as they actually are, the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape, in the case of sensual pleasures, I abandoned craving for sensual pleasures. I abandoned the fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with the mind inward at peace. If you remember, Sariputta and Moggallana, before they came, the disciples, they also went for parties and continued to party. And then even with such enjoyment, they realized that was futile. Even Ajahn Brahmavanso mentions how he went for a concert, and when the concert ended, he wanted more. And they said, encore, encore, when things end. So, but he had now this, Buddha says, when he was a prince, he abandoned all of this and he abided in peace. And now he says, when he sees other worldlings, other people burning with this, running behind these, who are not free from lust, who are not free from sensual pleasures, he says, he uses a powerful word here. It's called kajjaman. Putujjana, burning with the fever of sensual pleasures. He says, I do not envy them, nor do I delight in them. Why? Because there is, Magandiya, a delight apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses even the divine bliss. Right. So let's see. And he says, since I take delight in this, I do not envy those who go for lower sensual pleasures. Now, what is the Buddha referring to here by the delight apart from sensual pleasures? So, we know beyond the domain of this sensory, this realm of sensory perception, there are certain dimensions and of experience available to, they're only accessible through meditation or deep jhanic states. Meditative absorptions, and these have to be reached by giving up indulgence and enjoyment of sense pleasures and training the mind in the practice of samadhi meditation. So vitakka vichara. So each step we abandon certain things, and I'm not going into the details, but through each of these we eliminate the certain distinctions or distinctive features, and when we reach the 4th jhana, even the pleasant feeling falls away and the mind is in equanimity, ekaggata. But these meditative absorptions still belong to the mundane world, the conditioned world. That's not what the Buddha is referring to here. So Buddha has mastery over the jhanas, and I think from time to time he abides in them. And they serve as a base for the development of insight. And it is through this insight knowledge that one reaches the stages of realization, the breakthrough to the supreme truth. And by this, reaching these stages of penetration or realization, that one uproots all the defilements. And when all the defilements are uprooted, one gains access to this special state, the state available, accessible only to a fully enlightened or liberated one, which is called the state of Arahanthood. So the commentary uses the words Arahanta Samapatti. So Samapatti means meditative attainment. Phala means fruition. So the fruit of Arahanthood, the one who has uprooted all the defilements, and so it's a kind of taintless, absolutely taintless state of mind, state of perfect freedom, blissful freedom. In the suttas, it is referred to as Vimukti Sukha, which means the happiness or bliss of liberation. So now in this passage, the Buddha is referring to this attainment, that which surpasses even divine bliss. So now, to show the relation to those who are enjoying and dowsing in these senses, Buddha uses an analogy or a simile. This sutta is full of them. So he says there's this householder who is very wealthy. He has access to all the 5 objects of sense pleasure, but he leads a righteous life. And after death, he is born in the heavenly world, in the retinue of the gods of the 33. There he is surrounded by a group of celestial women in this Nandana grove. And he is able to enjoy himself thoroughly, endowed with the cords of all these divine sensual pleasures. So, you know, we have heard that above this human realm, there are various heavenly dimensions. And those gods, they emanate light. They travel about freely. They don't have to work from 9 to 5 like us. And they communicate telepathically, and they enjoy themselves from morning till night. Now, if this householder was born in that heavenly world, is he going to look through the clouds towards a person on the human realm, enjoying the cords of the 5 sensual pleasures? Is he going to give up that pleasure, the celestial pleasure, in order to come down to earth to enjoy these pleasures? So that's the simile there, a small one. So still the sensual pleasures of the human world are considered far inferior to those of the divine heavenly world. So Magandiya, it says, the householder who has been reborn as a god wouldn't have any envy on the householder, on the human householder, because heavenly sensual pleasure is far more excellent and sublime than human sensual pleasure. And then, so the Buddha repeats the same passage, explaining how this newly born Deva would not even want to look at the person in the human world who is engaging in all the senses. And he says, I don't envy them because I can experience a delight, a bliss apart from the sensual pleasures and unwholesome states which surpass even the divine. So he's not talking about the divine pleasures. He's not talking about the mundane sensory pleasures of the human world, but he's talking about the state of happiness or bliss that is derived at liberation. Now, after taking these elevated similes, the Buddha uses a very stark, I would say even grotesque simile, a series of similes actually. 3 similes of lepers. Right. So the subject of all the similes are the same up to the very end, but the events are different. Now there's a leper who has sores and blisters on his limbs and bleeding inside, so he scratches. He scratches himself to alleviate the pain, and as he scratches, he breaks the scabs, and they are opening again and becoming vulnerable. And to you don't have to have leprosy for this. If you have eczema or even a mosquito bite, you would know what you would do. You would scratch and scratch till that goes, but then you could even damage your skin. So yet we get a certain kind of satisfaction. So the leper, to eliminate that pain, because he finds a certain measure of satisfaction, he's cauterizing his body in a burning coal pit. So now he gains satisfaction or some kind of how do you say, relief from his pain by cauterizing his body. Yet we know, so his friends, let's say, his friends bring a physician and treat him, and he's cured of his leprosy. Then he might see another leper who did the same things that he was doing, scratching, itching, cauterizing his body. Would he want to return to that state that he previously was? So he would say, even if I give an arm, I would not go back to that, to being the leper, spending the whole day mourning, scratching next to the charcoal fire, cauterizing myself. So would the man, now cured of his leprosy, still envy the man still burning with leprosy, still trying to find a cure for leprosy, still scratching, itching? And Magandiya says, no. Now the same simile of the leper, Buddha takes in a different way. The second simile. It's a very powerful simile again. We have the leper with the sores and blisters. If you read the suttas, it gives the same set of sentences: scratching his blisters, itching, sore, all of that. Then 2 strong men came along and seized him and dragged him towards the fire pit. Wouldn't this man try somehow or other to avoid going to the fire pit because it causes pain, because it will burn? Why? Because the fire is indeed painful to touch, hot and scorching. And now Buddha asks Magandiya, is it only now that the fire was hot and scorching? Or previously too, was it hot and scorching? But when the man, the leper with the sores, with blisters on his limbs, he was devoured by worms and so on, the openings of his wounds coming out, his faculties were impaired. His faculties were not in normal condition. And even though the fire was actually painful to touch, he acquired a mistaken perception of the fire as pleasant. So a perception which is upside down, distorted. And it says sanya vipallasa. So a perverted perception. So according to the Buddhist texts, there are 4 types of distorted perceptions. The distorted perception of what is really impermanent as taken as permanent. The inverted perception of what is really dukkha or suffering as being pleasurable or happy. The distorted perception of what is not self as being self. And the distorted perception of what is not beautiful as beautiful. 4 distorted perceptions. So here is an example of a distorted person who perception actually, which whereas the fire is actually painful, the leper takes it as pleasant and he continues to cauterize his body because he gains some kind of satisfaction. Because he has a terrible disease. And because of that disease, his faculties are not working or impaired. And so he feels the pleasure in and relief in the hot fire, which is really intensely painful. So too Magandiya. Now Buddha goes on to say, in the past, sensual pleasures were painful to touch, hot and scorching. In the future too, sensual pleasures will be painful to touch and hot and scorching. And now at present, sensual pleasures are hot and scorching. They actually seem to give some pleasure when one approaches them with an undeveloped mind, covered with ignorance and delusion. But if one sees it as they really are, for what they are the causes of bondage and suffering. And so they think, so it can be described as painful or hot and scorching. And these people who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, who burn with a fever for sensual pleasures, have faculties that are impaired, craving influences on all the senses. And as a result, these sensual pleasures are actually painful. And these people acquire distorted perception of them as pleasant. In other words, dukkhe sukha sanya, distorted perception of perceiving pleasure in what is really painful or suffering. But when we look at this with the eye of wisdom, even though they give a temporary enjoyment, they're causes for addiction, causes for bondage. Now, the Buddha takes, so gradually Magandiya is opening his eyes. Okay, so we don't know, this is only Buddha who can do this with his eye of wisdom. He goes on to the same leper, again with sores and blisters on his limbs and so on and so forth. He cauterizes his body in this charcoal pit, and the more he scratches, the more evil smelling or foul smelling, his wounds become enlarged, and the more foul smelling and evil smelling his body will become. And so it is a vicious cycle. He cauterizes his body, he keeps scratching, he keeps opening the closed wounds, so he gets pleasure and relief, and now he thinks it's finished, but he starts scratching it again, he aggravates his wounds, all of that. So the Buddha says, in the same way, people who are not free from their sensual pleasures, devoured by sensual pleasures, they go on and on indulging in these. The more they indulge in the sensual pleasures, the more craving, and then the more they want it, the more they're burned by this, and they find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in these 5 chords of sensual pleasure. But it's a vicious cycle. So there's always an end. There's always unsatisfactoriness. Now he caps his argument. That's why I said this sutta is quite long, and it's oh dear, I didn't look at the time. It is actually the same thing, but when you read through it, you'll understand. Buddha caps his argument with an example of a powerful king who has freely indulged himself in the pleasures. But Buddha asks Magandiya, have you seen a king as such, or such a king who is at peace, who is inwardly at peace? A king who has everything, who's indulging in all the 5 senses. And Magandiya says no. And Buddha says, I too have not seen a king or a very rich person, he uses the word king actually, who has his mind inwardly at peace. But he says, on the contrary, those Aztecs and Brahmins who have understood as they are, their arising, passing away, gratification, danger, and escape in sensual pleasures, and to remove the craving for sensual pleasures, these are the ones who dwell free from thirst with a mind inwardly at peace. And so, after delivering this series of very powerful similes and arguments, you would say, the Buddha utters an exclamation: Arogya parama labha nibbanam paramang sukham attangikocha magganam kemang amata gami nanti. We have heard that. We've heard the first few. The greatest of all gain is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best path, for it leads to the safety of the deathless. So when the Buddha uttered these words, the wanderer Magandiya expresses his appreciation to go and says, Master Gautama, it's wonderful. It's marvelous what you have just spoken. Then he recites the first two stanzas. Arogya Paramalabha, Nibbanamam Paramang Sukham. And he says, we too, now he's from the wandering sect, and we too have heard it by the wanderers of our own tradition, in my own tradition. And these two statements agree. But the Buddha is not going to settle with that here. He's not going to settle with that argument of the wanderer, because Magandiya belongs to the school of hedonists, and they think that sensual pleasure is the greatest enjoyment. So the Buddha asks him, what do your own teachers understand about health? What do your own teachers understand about Nibbana? Then Magandiya gets up, and then he points to his body and says, you know, he must be having a very strong physique and well built. So he says, he points to his body and he says, this is what is meant by health. This is what I am: healthy, I am endowed, I am happy. Nothing afflicts me. That's what he says. And he thinks that this good bodily health is identical with the highest enjoyment. The way he says that is Nibbana. So that indicates that the word Nibbana was not Buddha's creation, but it was used by many Aztecs in Aztec communities before that, as a designation for the perfect state of satisfaction, the ultimate happiness, a complete contentment. And now the Buddha is going to counter Magandiya with another of these really striking and memorable similes. I'll try to be as short as possible. He says, suppose that a man, now Magandiya's view is that his health is Nibbana. So he says that a man is born blind and he can't see dark, light. There's a description, but I'll skip that. He can't see the sun and the moon, so on and so forth. And then another man comes and he says, it is very nice and wonderful to be wearing this white cloth. And then this man hears this and he thinks, okay, I would also like to wear a white cloth, a clean cloth. Then he asks this man, and this scheming man, he thinks, okay, this guy can't see anything. I'm going to give him a dirty cloth and let him think it's clean. So he gives maybe a dirty apron or something to this poor deluded man. And that man thinks, okay, this is now a white cloth. So he puts it on and he goes around boasting, I have this white, beautiful white cloth. And then he's happy. He thinks it's a spotless cloth. In reality, it's dirty, but he can't see because he's blind. And so when the Buddha says, what do you think, Magandiya? When that man was blind, who is blind from birth, accepted the dirty cloth, put it on and went around boasting that it was a clean cloth, Did he do so with knowledge of and vision? Did he actually see it, or did he do it because out of faith of the man with good eyesight? Did he actually know what he was saying? Did he actually see, or did he have faith in this person who gave it to him? Magandiya says he didn't know, but he did so out of faith of this man with eyesight. And so Buddha says, so too the wanderers of other sects are blind and without vision. They do not know health, they do not see Nibbana, yet they utter this comment. So at this point of the argument, so his point of the argument is that Magandiya is taking this body to be healthy, vigorous, strong, and that is Nibbana. It's like the dirty, soiled cement cloth, and he's going around saying it's health and it's Nirvana. So it's just like blind man saying that the dirty garment is clean. It also says somewhere down the line, this last two verse in the 4-line quatrain, the second 2 lines of the verse have disappeared, or people have forgotten it, and only the first 2 remain. And that's what they were saying when they said Arogya Paramalabha Nibbanam Paramam Sukham. The last 2 were kind of not used. For what reason, we don't know. So they misunderstood the meaning of nirvana to think that it's just this ultimate sensual pleasures. So now Buddha says, all this body is a disease, a tumor, a calamity, an affliction. I know we don't feel it right now. We don't feel that our body is that. But in reality, if you go to a ward or a hospital, we'll come to understand what that means. And Buddha tells Magandiya, in referring to this, you say this is health, you say this is Nibbana, but you do not have the noble vision. The Buddha uses the expression Arya Chakku, the eye of the noble one. And by means which you see real health and you see Nibbana. So now Buddha is leading Magandiya further and further because he knows still Magandiya's faculties are not quite ripe for him to grasp that. Because so he has lots of wholesome roots, but Buddha knows the exact time to deliver the nail, I think, hit the nail in the head. So, but still a dramatic change has happened to this proud, arrogant Magandiya who was ready to fight. And it seems he has now abandoned his previous wrong view, that the confidence that he has developed, pasada, which means that his mind is now becoming trusting. And then, if you remember at the beginning of the sutta, he saw Buddha's bed of grass and called him a bunahu, a repressionist. But now his mind is changing, and I think that through Buddha's force of argument, and he has stopped all his resistance, and he's slowly opening his eye of wisdom. Then he says, I have confidence in Master Gautama for teaching, and he wants Buddha to teach him. But Buddha seems very incompassionate. Buddha is quite not ready to teach him. And he, this is through Buddha's eye of wisdom, he saw he's still not right, perhaps. And he says, he takes again this simile of the white cloth, and he says, suppose there's a man blind from birth, and the physicians try all types of medicine. His friends take him to a physician, and he takes all types of medicine, but still nothing helps him. He still does not gain his sight. Wouldn't the doctor then try all the different types of treatment just to reap disappointment and frustration? So Magandiya says yes. Then the Buddha says, so too Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma, this is health, This is Nibbana. Maybe you won't see it. Maybe you won't know it. This real health and real Nibbana. Now, through this, the simile, Buddha is refusing that request of Magandiya for direct teaching for the moment. It seems odd, right? So now Buddha is giving, it says here, the Buddha is giving Magandiya his faculties a chance to mature and become stronger. Because if Magandiya got discouraged at that point and said, okay, let it be, I will stay like this, then he would not have reached that highest level that he had the potential to. And then after Buddha refuses or puts off Magandiya, Magandiya repeats the state of confidence and says, look, I have achieved a lot of confidence in you. Now for the third and last time, Buddha picks up the simile of the man born blind, and with some luck, his sight is cured, and he is able to see for himself truly that white cloth that he has been going around saying, white cloth, this is spotless, pristine, but which actually was a dirty cloth. And through his real sight. And then his friends, so when he regains his vision, he would probably want, it says here, he would even want to kill the man who tricked him. So he thinks, for a long time I have been tricked, cheated, defrauded by this man with this dirty soiled garment, who is telling me this is your white cloth, beautiful and spotless. And then this next paragraph is ready. So too, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma, this is health, this is Nibbana, you might know health, you might see Nibbana. So what is meant here is gaining sight so that one could see what is health and what is Nibbana. This means the arising of what is called the, in the terminology of the suttas, Dhamma Chakku, the eye of the Dhamma. And then is the realization, the awakening experience, this breakthrough of experience that transformed the person from an ordinary person or Putujana to an Aryan. At the lowest level, it would make a person into stream entry, Sotapanna. So normally this eye of Dhamma rises at the highest point of the development of insight or vipassana. It actually, when one reaches this highest point of vipassana, then it takes a jump and beyond that point, and it enters into this opening of the eye of Dhamma, this breakthrough in the Dhamma, which we call Dhamma Chakku. And what happens with the opening of the eye of Dhamma? Up until this point, we have been contemplating on this arising and passing of conditions, formations, all of this, enjoying all these pleasures. So they are breaking up and passing away, and then this phenomena of the five aggregates. But when at that point of awareness, the attention shifts from all conditioned phenomena and penetrates the unconditioned element, the deathless element. And simultaneously, I'll explain this a little bit more. With that awakening of the deathless element, the penetration of the unconditioned element, the wisdom mind is also, it fully understands, it fully comprehends the nature of these five aggregates. And what happens at that moment, again, with the penetration of the unconditioned, the deluded concepts that centered around these five aggregates explode, broken down, vanish. And they see these five aggregates were not what they were taken to be. So, right. And then, so this concept of always saying, this is mine, I, me, they all disappear and they vanish. And then because we've been clinging to this, clinging to all kinds of sensory perceptions. And when one realizes that it's through this clinging that we have been frantically engaged in this activity, which has been building up these rounds of existence through clinging. We are plunging, it's plunging us yet and again from birth to old age to death to lamentation, sorrow, grief, all of the works. So you might realize that this is the end part of the formula of dependent origination. So the Buddha is merging, he's actually merging his teachings on the nature of the 5 aggregates with the teachings of dependent origination. At this point, Magandiya is completely convinced about the Buddha. And he says, yes, now I have complete confidence in the Buddha. Master Gautama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I may rise from this seat cured of my blindness. And then Buddha gives, this is for all of us, Buddha gives Magandiya practical advice. He says you should associate with true men, true persons, or virtuous, enlightened individuals. And when you associate with virtuous, enlightened individuals, you will hear the true doctrine. And when you hear the true doctrine, you will practice in accordance with the doctrine. And when you practice in accordance with the Dhamma, then you will know and see for yourself and come to this realization that these are diseases and tumors, and everything ceases without remainder. And there's no becoming. And with the cessation of becoming, there's a cessation of birth, cessation of death, aging, sorrow, lamentation, all of that. And so with this paragraph, Buddha, having led Magandiya to the point where one gains the vision of the Dhamma, develops that vision further to the point that all clinging is uprooted. And with the cessation or eradication of clinging, the entire process of birth and death comes to an end. There's also a small point where Magandiya wants to be ordained, but Buddha gives him a small condition. He fulfills that condition. Magandiya fulfills that condition. And he announces that he's going forth. He goes for refuge of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And lo and behold, he asked to be ordained. And after full ordination, not long after, Magandiya, dwelling alone, diligent, ardent, resolute, realized for himself the supreme goal of the holy life. And he directly knew birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What has been done has been done. And there's no becoming, no existence in the future. And then Venerable Magandiya became one of the Arahants. So I'm sorry, I didn't even look at the time. Thank you, Professor Manuel Senanayake, for this opportunity. And so on this 75th year of our beloved motherland, Sri Lanka's freedom, we could say, I wish all of you also, we attain this freedom from this bondage of samsara. May all beings be well and happy. Thank you so much.